The winter wind came screaming across the Wyoming plains the morning Clara Belle first saw the advertisement. She had been sitting alone beside the small iron stove in her rented cabin, mending the same brown dress she had repaired 3 times that winter. Outside, snow scraped against the windows like handfuls of sand. The town of Mercy Creek had disappeared beneath a white blanket, and the streets were nearly empty. Clara was 32 years old, though hardship had carved enough lines around her eyes to make her look older. She had been married once. Her husband, Thomas, had died 6 years earlier from a fever that swept through the territory that spring. Before he died, he had wanted children. Clara had wanted them too. But after years of trying, the doctors in Cheyenne had finally told her what she had secretly feared. She would never have children of her own. The words had changed everything. Friends stopped asking when she planned to start a family. Married women looked at her with pity. Even church gatherings became difficult because children seemed to be everywhere, laughing, crying, tugging at their mother's skirts. Clara learned to keep her distance. She told herself she had accepted it. She hadn't. That morning, she walked into the Mercy Creek General Store to buy flour and lamp oil. Near the stove, a few men were playing cards while old newspapers lay scattered across a wooden counter. One particular advertisement caught her eye. Wanted, woman to help care for 6 children. Widower offers room, meals, and fair wages. Must be patient. Must understand hardship. Apply to Samuel Hart, Hart Ranch, 12 miles west of Mercy Creek. Clara stared at the words. 6 children. She almost laughed. A woman who could not have one child was being asked to care for 6. Yet something inside her refused to let her walk away. She folded the newspaper carefully and placed it inside her coat. That evening, she packed one small suitcase. Before leaving, Clara stood beside the little mirror over her wash basin and studied her reflection. "You know what this is," she whispered. "An escape. Not from poverty. Not from loneliness. From a life that had become too quiet." The next morning, she borrowed a horse and rode west toward Hart Ranch. She did not know that behind that advertisement waited 6 grieving children, a widower who had forgotten how to smile, and a house where every room still carried the memory of a woman who had died far too young. She also did not know that before the winter ended, one little girl would call her Mama for the first time, and Clara would discover that sometimes the heart can become a mother long before the world allows it to become one. Clara Belle had spent 6 years learning how to live with silence. It was the kind of silence that followed a person from room to room, settling into the corners of a house and growing heavier after sunset. Her little cabin outside Mercy Creek had only 2 rooms, a cast-iron stove, a narrow bed, and a wooden table beside the window. There was nothing remarkable about it, except that Clara had once imagined a child's laughter filling every corner. That dream had died slowly. Her husband, Thomas, had wanted children more than anything. He used to carve tiny wooden horses while sitting beside the stove and tell Clara that one day their children would race them across the floor. Clara would laugh and pretend to scold him for making such a mess. Then Thomas died. Afterward, Clara discovered that grief could make a person feel invisible. She worked wherever she could, washing clothes, sewing dresses, preparing meals for ranch hands. She accepted every honest job because honest work was easier to bear than pity. Yet whenever she returned to her cabin, she faced the same empty chair. Then came the newspaper advertisement. She read it 3 times. Woman wanted to help care for 6 children. Widower offers room, meals, and fair wages. Clara's first thought was that she had no business answering it. Her second thought was that perhaps those 6 children needed someone just as desperately as she needed somewhere to belong. 2 days later, she rode west through falling snow. Hart Ranch appeared near dusk, its wooden buildings dark against the white prairie. A tired-looking man stood on the porch with a rifle resting against his shoulder. Samuel Hart. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and somewhere in his late 30s. His face carried the roughness of a man who had spent too many years beneath an unforgiving sky. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. They looked exhausted. Not angry. Not cold. Just tired. "You Clara Belle?" he asked. "Yes." Samuel glanced at her small suitcase. "You came alone?" "I did." He seemed surprised. Most women would have turned around before reaching the ranch. Most women weren't looking for work. Something almost resembling a smile touched his mouth. Then a child's scream came from inside the house. Samuel's expression changed instantly. He opened the door. 6 children stared from the hallway. The oldest boy, Daniel, was 14. Beside him stood 13-year-old Ruth, already wearing the serious expression of someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. 11-year-old Eli hid behind her. 8-year-old Mary clutched a ragged doll. 6-year-old Ben had tears streaking his dirty cheeks. And the youngest, little Annie, stood barefoot on the wooden floor despite the freezing weather. She looked directly at Clara. "Are you the lady who's staying?" Clara knelt. "If your father will have me." Annie studied her carefully. Then she stepped forward and quietly placed her tiny hand in Clara's. It was warm. Clara felt something inside her chest tighten. Samuel watched them from the doorway. "You should know," he said quietly, "my children aren't easy." Clara looked at the 6 faces before her. "Neither is life." Samuel lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without pity. That night, Clara cooked supper. The children barely spoke. Samuel sat at the end of the table, watching Clara move around the kitchen as though he had forgotten what it looked like when someone cared about making a house feel like home. When Clara placed a warm bowl before Annie, the little girl whispered, "Mama used to do that." Clara froze. Samuel looked away. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Clara gently touched Annie's hair. "Tell me about her." Annie's eyes filled with tears. And Clara realized that this was not simply a job she had ridden 12 miles through the snow to accept. This was a family carrying 6 different pieces of the same broken heart. Clara had expected 6 difficult children. She had not expected 6 different kinds of loneliness. Daniel had become the man of the house before he was old enough to shave. He checked the horses every morning, chopped wood before breakfast, and never complained when Samuel asked him to work longer. Ruth behaved like a second mother, constantly reminding the younger children to wash their hands, finish their meals, and stay away from the creek. Eli had stopped speaking altogether. Mary carried her ragged doll everywhere. Ben cried whenever thunder shook the windows. And Annie followed Clara like a little shadow. Samuel watched all of it from a distance. He was a good man, Clara could see that. But grief had taught him to stand apart from the people he loved. Every morning, Clara found another small way to change the house. She mended curtains. She scrubbed the kitchen floor. She baked biscuits. She taught Mary how to sew a button and showed Ben how to whistle through 2 fingers. At first, the children resisted. Daniel told her they had survived perfectly well before she came. Clara simply nodded. "I believe you." He frowned. "I don't need a mother." "I never said you did." That answer surprised him. Clara wasn't trying to replace their mother. She understood that some spaces in a heart belonged to people who could never return. She only wanted to make the remaining spaces less painful. Weeks passed. The house began to change. There were fewer slammed doors. More laughter. One evening, Clara found Samuel repairing a broken chair near the fireplace. "You fixed that yourself?" she asked. "Mostly." "Mostly?" "I hit my thumb with the hammer." She smiled. Samuel looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he laughed. It was a quiet laugh, rusty from years of disuse. Clara felt her heart flutter. She quickly looked away. Samuel noticed. "You always blush when you're embarrassed." "No. You are now." "I am not." He smiled again. It was the first time Clara had seen the man behind the grief. Later that night, they stood together on the porch beneath a sky crowded with stars. "I haven't heard myself laugh in a long time," Samuel admitted. Clara folded her hands against the cold. "Perhaps you should laugh more often." "Perhaps I should." He looked at her. "Since you've come here, this place feels different." Clara's heart beat faster. "You have 6 children who deserve a happy home." "I wasn't talking about the children." She looked up. Samuel's expression was gentle. For one dangerous moment, Clara wondered if a man could truly see her, not as a barren woman, not as a hired hand, not as someone who had lost everything, but simply as Clara. Then the bedroom door opened. Annie appeared carrying her blanket. "Miss Clara?" Clara immediately turned. "What is it, sweetheart? Can I sleep near you tonight?" Clara opened her arms. Annie ran into them. Samuel watched silently. Clara carried the little girl inside and tucked her beneath the blankets. When she returned, Samuel was still standing on the porch. "She misses her mother," he said. "I know. So do I." Clara looked at him. Samuel's voice dropped. "Sometimes I think I miss her so much that loving anyone else would be a betrayal." Clara's eyes softened. "You don't betray the dead by allowing yourself to live." Samuel stared at her. Those words stayed between them. Days became weeks, and something tender began growing between them. It was not sudden. It was not reckless. It lived in small moments. Samuel leaving the warmest coat by the door because he knew Clara would forget hers. Clara saving the last piece of apple pie because she knew Samuel liked it. His hand brushing hers while they reached for the same cup. Her smile when he entered the kitchen. Neither dared name what was happening. But the children noticed. One evening, Daniel quietly asked Ruth, "Do you think Pa likes her?" Ruth smiled. "I think everyone does." Outside, beneath the pale Wyoming moon, Samuel stood beside Clara at the fence line. "I don't know what you have done to this family," he whispered. Clara smiled softly. "Nothing." Samuel shook his head. "You reminded us how to feel again." By the time spring reached Hart Ranch, Clara had become part of the family in ways none of them could explain. The children no longer called her Miss Bell. Annie called her Mama when she thought no one was listening. Mary braided her hair. Ben waited beside the kitchen window every afternoon for Clara to return from town. Even Daniel had begun seeking her advice, though he pretended otherwise. And Samuel had fallen deeply in love with her. He never said the words. Neither did Clara. But love had begun appearing in everything they did. One evening, Samuel found Clara sitting beneath the cottonwood tree, reading a letter. She quickly folded it. "Who is it from?" he asked. "No one." Samuel studied her face. "Clara." She looked away. "It's from a doctor in Cheyenne." Samuel's expression tightened. "Are you sick?" "No." "Then why would a doctor write you?" Clara's fingers trembled. "I should have told you before I came here." Samuel sat beside her. "Tell me now." Clara stared across the fields. "When I was married, Thomas and I tried for children for years." Samuel remained silent. "The doctors told me I couldn't have them." He reached for her hand. She pulled it away. "There's more." Her voice broke. "Thomas didn't die from the fever." Samuel frowned. "What?" "He died because he went looking for medicine for me." Clara swallowed hard. I was sick after losing the baby. Samuel stared at her. You had a baby? Clara nodded. A little girl. Tears filled her eyes. She was born alive. Samuel's chest tightened. Clara. She lived for only 3 days. The wind moved through the grass. Clara pressed both hands against her face. I blamed myself. Thomas blamed himself. We never recovered. Samuel gently touched her shoulder. You were a mother. Clara shook her head. I was supposed to be. You were. She looked at him through tears. No. I failed her. Samuel took her hand. You didn't fail anyone. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to lean against him. Samuel wrapped his arms around her. She cried against his chest. He held her as though he had been waiting years for the chance. Then came the sound of approaching hooves. Daniel appeared on horseback, his face pale. Pa! Samuel stood immediately. What happened? Riders. 3 men coming from the south. Samuel's hand moved toward his revolver. Who are they? Daniel swallowed. They asked for Clara. Everything inside Samuel went cold. Clara stepped forward. I know who they are. Samuel turned. Who? She looked toward the distant road. My husband's brother. Samuel's face hardened. Why would he want you? Clara whispered the truth. Thomas left a debt. The riders arrived before sunset. Their leader, a cruel-looking man named Wade Bell, dismounted and stared at Clara. There you are. Samuel stepped between them. She isn't going anywhere. Wade smiled. That's not your decision. Clara's heart raced. Samuel, please. He didn't move. Wade pulled a folded document from his coat. Thomas owed money. The ranch where he worked was sold. Clara inherited nothing except his debt. Samuel read the paper. The amount was enormous. That's impossible. Wade smiled. Not anymore. Clara stepped forward. I'll go. Samuel grabbed her wrist. No. If I don't, they'll take the ranch. Samuel looked at her in disbelief. Why would you sacrifice yourself for us? Clara's eyes filled with tears. Because you gave me something I thought I had lost forever. Samuel's voice cracked. What? A family. Annie suddenly ran from the house. Mama. Clara dropped to her knees. The little girl wrapped both arms around her. Wade stared. Samuel stared. Clara held Annie tightly, knowing she might have to leave the only home where her heart had finally learned to breathe again. The morning Clara was supposed to leave Heart Ranch arrived beneath a sky the color of ashes. She had packed before sunrise. There was little to pack. 2 dresses. A worn pair of boots. Thomas's old photograph. And the small wooden horse he had carved for the child they had lost. Clara stood beside the kitchen table, staring at it through tears. She heard footsteps behind her. Samuel. He stopped in the doorway. You were really going to leave without saying goodbye? Clara couldn't look at him. If I say goodbye, I won't be able to go. Samuel crossed the room. He took the wooden horse from her hand and placed it gently on the table. You don't have to leave. They'll take the ranch. Let them try. Samuel. I've spent years believing that losing someone meant losing everything. He reached for her hands. Then you came here. Clara's tears fell. You gave my children laughter. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You made this house feel alive again. His voice trembled. I won't let fear take you from us. Before Clara could answer, the front door opened. Daniel entered with the sheriff and 2 other men. Behind them stood Wade Bell, his wrists tied. Clara stared in shock. The sheriff held several papers. "Turns out that debt was forged," he said. "Wade and his men have been doing this to widows and struggling families across the territory." Samuel looked at Clara. "You aren't going anywhere." Clara covered her mouth as she began to cry. Then little footsteps thundered down the hallway. Annie rushed into her arms. "Mama!" Clara fell to her knees and held the child tightly. This time, she didn't correct her. She simply kissed Annie's hair and whispered, "I'm here." Samuel knelt beside them. One by one, the other children gathered around. Daniel tried to hide his tears. Ruth didn't bother. Mary hugged Clara's waist. Ben climbed onto her lap. For years, Clara had believed motherhood was something she had lost forever. She had thought it required giving birth. But standing there surrounded by 6 children who had chosen her with their hearts, she finally understood. Sometimes a mother is not the woman who brings a child into the world. Sometimes she is the woman who stays. The woman who wipes away tears. The woman who sits beside a frightened child during a storm. The woman who cooks supper when everyone else has forgotten how to smile. The woman who opens her heart despite knowing it has already been broken. Later that evening, Samuel took Clara outside. The sunset stretched across the Wyoming plains, turning the snow-covered mountains gold. "I loved my wife," he said quietly. Clara nodded. "I know. I'll always love her." "I know that too." Samuel took Clara's hand. "But loving her doesn't mean I can't love you." Clara looked into his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't perfect. But Clara stared at it as though it were the most precious thing she had ever seen. "I don't want to replace your past," Samuel whispered. "I want to build a future with you." Clara's tears returned. She nodded. "Yes." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger. From the porch came 6 loud cheers. Clara laughed through her tears. Samuel smiled. And beneath the wide Wyoming sky, the woman who had once believed herself barren discovered that her heart had never been empty at all.